The Viridian Empire had swept through the Outer Rim like a plague, conquering 12 star systems in less than 3 years. Their warships were massive, their weapons devastating, and their mercy non-existent. Every civilization that stood against them was crushed beneath overwhelming military force. The Viridians believed in one simple principle: might makes right. Those who could not defend themselves deserved to be slaves. The Kelthara system was next on their list. It was a peaceful collection of mining colonies and trading stations, home to millions of civilians who had never known war. The Kelthara people were merchants and craftsmen, not soldiers. Their largest vessels were cargo haulers, not battleships. When their long-range sensors detected the Viridian fleet assembling at the edge of their territory, the Kelthara Council knew they had no chance of survival. Council leader Marek stood before the communication array, his 4 arms trembling as he recorded the same message for the 100th time. His species had smooth blue skin and large eyes that could see into the infrared spectrum. But those eyes could not see a path to victory against the coming storm. He sent distress signals to every known civilization in the galaxy, begging for military assistance, promising whatever payment they could afford, pleading for someone to care that millions of innocent lives were about to be extinguished. Most governments ignored the calls. Some sent polite regrets. A few offered to accept Kelthara refugees if they could escape before the Viridians arrived. No one wanted to risk war with an empire that had never lost a battle. The galaxy had learned a harsh lesson. Standing up to the Viridians meant joining their list of conquered worlds. The distress call eventually reached Earth, broadcast across all frequencies, carrying the desperation of a dying civilization. The message was reviewed by the Admiralty Board in Geneva, where 5 admirals sat around a holographic display showing the tactical situation. The numbers were grim. Intelligence estimated the Viridian force at 300 warships, each one capable of reducing a city to ash in minutes. Admiral Patricia Gomez drummed her fingers on the table, her dark eyes studying the star charts. She had spent 30 years in Earth's military, rising through the ranks during humanity's expansion into space. She had seen war, had lost friends to the chaos of combat, and she knew the cost of every decision made in this room. The other admirals argued back and forth, debating whether Earth should risk involvement in a conflict so far from home. That was when Captain Jack Morrison entered the room without invitation. He was younger than most ship captains, only 38 years old, but his record spoke louder than his age. He had ended the Mars Rebellion with minimal casualties through tactics that military academies still studied. He was tall and lean, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to calculate a dozen variables in every glance. He walked with the confidence of someone who had never met a problem he could not solve. Admiral Gomez looked up at him with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. Jack did not salute or apologize for the interruption. He simply placed his hands on the table and spoke in a calm, clear voice. He told them that Earth should respond to the Kelthara distress call, not with a fleet, but with a single ship. His ship, the Defiant. The room erupted in protest. Admiral Chen called it suicide. Admiral Okonkwo said it would be a waste of Earth's most advanced vessel. Admiral Rousseau argued that sending one ship would be seen as an insult to the Kelthara and a joke to the Viridians. But Jack remained calm, waiting for the noise to die down before he continued. He explained that the Defiant was not like other ships. It was a prototype built around experimental technology that most of Earth's military considered too dangerous for mass production. The Cascade drive allowed the vessel to phase partially into subspace, making it nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons while still capable of devastating offensive strikes. The ship's weapons systems used kinetic plasma hybrid technology that adapted to enemy defenses in real time. Every system on the Defiant was designed with one purpose: to make a single ship as effective as an entire fleet. More importantly, Jack argued, sending one ship would send a message. It would show the galaxy that humanity did not need overwhelming numbers to protect the innocent. It would demonstrate that Earth valued efficiency and innovation over brute force. And if he succeeded, it would establish humanity as a power that could not be ignored or dismissed. Admiral Gomez studied Jack for a long moment before asking the question that everyone was thinking. What if he failed? What if the Viridians destroyed the Defiant and killed everyone aboard? Jack's answer was simple. Then Earth would know that even their best was not enough, and they would respond with the full might of their fleet. But he would not fail. The vote was close, but Admiral Gomez cast the deciding ballot in favor of Jack's plan. She told him that he had 72 hours to prepare, and that he could handpick his crew from any personnel in the fleet. She also made it clear that if he got himself killed on some fool's errand, she would personally write a terrible eulogy. Jack assembled his team within 24 hours. Navigator Linda Hayes was a slim woman with red hair who could calculate jump coordinates in her head faster than most computers. Weapons Officer Greg Palmer was a former Marine who had survived the Titan campaign and knew more about combat systems than anyone alive. Chief Engineer Casey Brooks was a genius who had helped design the Cascade Drive and understood its quirks better than its inventors. Medical Officer Helen Wright had volunteered for every dangerous mission in her career because she believed doctors belonged wherever people were dying. Communications. Officer Kevin Torres was young but brilliant, capable of managing a dozen comm channels simultaneously while analyzing enemy transmissions for tactical data. They gathered in the Defiant's briefing room, sitting around a table while Jack explained the mission. None of them had illusions about the danger. 300 Viridian warships against one human vessel. The odds were astronomical. But every person in that room had volunteered because they believed in what Jack represented. They believed that sometimes one person or one ship could make all the difference. The Defiant launched from Earth orbit 36 hours later. The ship was sleek and dark, its hull composed of adaptive armor that could shift density based on incoming threats. It was smaller than most military vessels, but packed with enough firepower to level a continent. As they accelerated away from Earth, Linda plotted their jump to the Kelthara system, while Casey ran final diagnostics on the Cascade Drive. Meanwhile, the Viridian fleet had intercepted Earth's response transmission. War Commander Threk Nal reviewed the message in his command chamber, his scaled face twisting into what passed for a smile among his species. The humans were sending one ship. One single ship to face his armada. He saw it as an insult, a display of arrogance that demanded punishment. Threk Nal issued orders to his fleet commanders. They would assemble at the edge of the Kelthara system and wait for the human vessel to arrive. He wanted his entire force present for the execution. He wanted the galaxy to watch as the Viridians crushed humanity's champion and proved once again that no one could stand against their empire. He imagined the wreckage of the human ship drifting through space, a monument to the futility of resistance. The Kelthara people watched their sensors with growing despair as the Viridian fleet gathered like storm clouds on their horizon. 300 warships, each one a harbinger of death and slavery. Their council had received confirmation that Earth was sending help, but they had not been told what form that help would take. When their long-range scanners finally detected the human response, Council Leader Merrick felt his hope die. One ship. The humans had sent one ship. Merrick stood on the observation deck of the Council station, staring out at the stars, wondering if humanity was mocking them or simply did not care enough to send real assistance. His aide suggested that perhaps the human vessel was just the first, that more would follow. But Marek knew better. He had seen the transmission timestamp. If Earth was sending a fleet, the first ship would have waited for the others. This was all the help they would receive. In the neutral zone between the Viridian Armada and the Kelthara colonies, space rippled with exotic energy. The Defiant emerged from faster-than-light travel in a flash of blue light, its engines humming with barely contained power. Jack sat in the captain's chair, his eyes scanning the tactical display that showed 300 red dots arranged in a battle formation. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. Linda confirmed their position and began plotting evasive maneuvers. Greg activated the weapons systems, watching as the ship's arsenal came online. Casey monitored the Cascade Drive, which was already building charge for combat operations. Helen prepared the medical bay, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she treated wounds or became one of the casualties. Kevin opened communication channels, ensuring that every ship and station within 10 light-years would hear what happened next. Jack stood up from his chair and walked to the forward viewport, staring out at the vast enemy fleet that waited for them. He thought about all the civilizations that had fallen before the Viridians, all the lives lost because no one was willing to stand against overwhelming odds. He thought about why he had joined Earth's military in the first place, about the belief that someone had to draw a line and say enough. He returned to his chair and told Kevin to open a wideband transmission. His voice carried across the void, clear and calm, reaching every Viridian ship, every Kelthara station, and every listening post within range. He identified himself as Captain Jack Morrison of the Earth vessel Defiant. He stated that the Viridian fleet had 1 hour to withdraw from Kelthara space, or they would be removed by force. Then he closed the channel and waited. The response came quickly. Threknal's mocking laughter filled the bridge, followed by a sneer about humanity's weakness and stupidity. The war commander asked if Earth was so pathetic that it could only send one ship to face his armada. He promised that the Defiant would be destroyed slowly, that he would personally ensure the human crew suffered before they died, and that their broken ship would serve as a warning to anyone who dared challenge Viridian supremacy. Jack listened to the entire transmission without expression. When it ended, he looked at his crew and saw determination in their eyes. They were afraid, which meant they were sane, but they were ready. He gave the order to advance toward the Viridian fleet, and Linda guided the Defiant forward at half speed, buying time for Casey to bring the Cascade drive to full power. The galaxy watched and waited to see if humanity's arrogance was justified, or if the Viridians would add another victory to their endless list of conquests. The hour passed in tense silence aboard the Defiant. Jack sat in his command chair watching the chronometer count down while his crew ran final system checks. Linda had programmed 17 different evasive patterns into the navigation computer, each one designed to keep them alive for a few more seconds. Greg had test-fired every weapons system 3 times, verifying that each torpedo launcher and plasma cannon would function when needed. Casey monitored the Cascade drive's power levels, watching the exotic matter containment fields hold steady at 98% efficiency. Helen had prepared every medical station on the ship and loaded emergency protocols into the automated systems. Kevin had established secure recording feeds that would transmit everything to Earth even if the Defiant was destroyed. The Viridian fleet remained motionless in its formation, 300 warships arranged in a sphere pattern designed to catch any vessel that tried to escape. Their weapons were armed, and targeting systems were locked onto the single human ship that dared to threaten them. Threknal stood on the bridge of his new flagship, replacing the command vessel that had been destroyed in a previous campaign. His clawed hands gripped the railing as he watched the chronometer count down, savoring the anticipation of crushing these arrogant humans. When the hour expired, Jack opened another wideband transmission. His voice was calm and measured as he informed the Viridian fleet that their time was up. He gave them one final chance to withdraw peacefully. He explained that humanity did not seek war, but they would not allow innocent civilizations to be enslaved. He said that the choice was now in Viridian hands: leave or face the consequences. Threknal's response was to order his fleet to advance. 300 warships began moving forward in perfect synchronization, their engines flaring as they accelerated toward the Defiant. The war commander opened a channel to all his ships, declaring that they would destroy the human vessels slowly, piece by piece, so that Earth would understand the price of defiance. His officers cheered, anticipating an easy victory against a foe that was either suicidal or insane. On the Kelthara Council station, Marek and his people watched the sensor displays with horror. The massive Viridian fleet was moving, and the single human ship was not retreating. They could not understand what Captain Morrison hoped to achieve. Even if his vessel was advanced, even if it had weapons beyond anything the Kelthara had seen, how could one ship survive against 300? Marek began composing a message to send to Earth, thanking them for their courage, even though it would not be enough to save his people. Jack watched the Viridian fleet close the distance, waiting for the perfect moment. He had studied their tactics for weeks, reviewing every battle they had ever fought, analyzing their patterns and strategies. The Viridians relied on overwhelming force and coordinated firepower. They surrounded their enemies and crushed them with simultaneous attacks from all directions. Their doctrine had never failed, because no one had ever possessed the technology to counter it. The Defiant would change that. When the Viridian fleet reached optimal firing range, Jack gave Casey the signal. The chief engineer activated the cascade drive with a sequence of commands that sent exotic energy flooding through the ship's systems. The Defiant's hull began to shimmer with an otherworldly blue glow as the vessel started phasing between normal space and subspace. The ship's outline became hazy, like a heat mirage, and sensor readings from the Viridian fleet suddenly showed conflicting data about the Defiant's position and mass. Threcknall saw the strange effect and felt the first stirring of doubt. He ordered his fleet to open fire anyway, confident that enough firepower would destroy anything. 300 warships launched their weapons simultaneously. Plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, and energy beams converged on the Defiant's position in a display of destruction that could have vaporized a moon. The space around the human ship lit up with explosions and energy discharges as thousands of weapons struck their target. But when the light faded, the Defiant was still there. The ship had not dodged or attempted to escape. It had simply allowed the weapons to pass through its partially phased hull without causing damage. The Viridian weapons had hit empty space, or rather, they had hit a space where the Defiant only partially existed. The cascade drive kept the ship anchored in real space enough to fire weapons but phased enough to avoid incoming attacks. Jack smiled slightly and gave Greg the order to return fire. The weapons officer targeted Threcknall's flagship first, wanting to cut off the head of the snake. He launched a single kinetic plasma hybrid torpedo, a weapon that Earth had spent a decade perfecting. The torpedo appeared as a streak of white light crossing the distance between ships in seconds. The Viridian flagship's shields activated automatically, rated to withstand any known weapon. The torpedo hit the shields and did something no Viridian had ever seen. Instead of exploding on contact, it analyzed the shield frequency in microseconds and adapted its own energy signature to match. The torpedo passed through the shields as if they were not there and struck the flagship's hull directly. The explosion tore through 3 decks, destroying the main reactor containment and triggering a cascade failure. Threcknall had time to scream in rage before his flagship split in half and exploded in a fireball visible from the Kelthara colonies. The Viridian fleet fell into chaos. Commanders shouted conflicting orders, trying to understand what had just happened. Their most powerful shields had failed to stop a single human weapon. Their coordinated assault had accomplished nothing. Ships broke formation, some trying to surround the Defiant, while others attempted to retreat and regroup. Linda took advantage of the confusion by putting the Defiant into motion. The ship accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible for a vessel its size. Weaving through the Viridian formation, like a dancer, she had programmed the navigation computer with patterns based on combat flight simulations she had run thousands of times. And now, those simulations became reality. The Defiant seemed to be everywhere at once, appearing on one side of the formation and then instantly shifting to another position. Greg worked his targeting systems with the precision of a surgeon. He did not aim for kill shots unless necessary. Instead, he targeted weapons arrays and engine systems, crippling Viridian ships rather than destroying them. Each torpedo found its mark, adapted to enemy defenses, and disabled another warship. Within 10 minutes, 20 Viridian vessels were drifting dead in space, their crews alive but helpless. Casey monitored the cascade drive carefully, managing the enormous power requirements needed to keep the ship phased while moving at combat speeds. The reactor was operating at levels that would have been considered catastrophic by normal engineering standards, but Casey had designed the system to handle extreme stress. She made constant adjustments, balancing power distribution between shields, weapons, and the drive system. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, knowing that one miscalculation could cause the entire ship to explode. Helen stood in the medical bay, watching the battle through monitor feeds, feeling useless because there were no wounded to treat. The Defiant had not taken a single hit. She found herself hoping that it stayed that way, while simultaneously feeling guilty for hoping they would not need her skills. She had trained her entire life to save lives in impossible situations, and now she was witnessing a battle where only the enemy was dying. Kevin recorded everything, ensuring that multiple copies of the battle footage were transmitted to secure Earth facilities in real time. He also monitored Viridian communications, listening to their commanders struggle to adapt to a threat they could not comprehend. He heard fear in their voices, panic replacing the arrogant confidence they had shown an hour earlier. He heard them calling for reinforcements, begging their war commander for orders, not understanding that Threknall was already dead. Jack stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes moving between tactical displays and the viewport, always thinking 3 moves ahead. He called out course corrections to Linda, target priorities to Greg, and power allocation requests to Casey. He commanded his ship the way a musician conducts an orchestra, each crew member playing their part in a deadly symphony. He felt no joy in the destruction, no satisfaction in the killing, but he felt resolve. This was necessary. This was the price of protecting the innocent. The Viridian fleet attempted to regroup, forming a tighter defensive sphere and concentrating their fire. A dozen ships targeted the Defiant simultaneously, learning from their earlier failure by trying to overwhelm the human ship's phasing capability with sustained fire. For a moment, it seemed to work. The Defiant's shimmer flickered as the Cascade drive struggled to handle the incoming energy. Alarms sounded on the bridge as power levels dropped to critical levels. Casey rerouted power from life support and artificial gravity, buying a few more seconds of phase stability. She shouted at Jack that they could not maintain this level of defense much longer. The Cascade drive needed time to recharge, or they would be forced to drop out of phase and become vulnerable. Jack made a split-second decision and ordered Linda to take them directly into the heart of the Viridian formation. Linda executed the maneuver without question, trusting Jack's judgment, even though it seemed suicidal. The Defiant accelerated toward the densest concentration of enemy ships, passing so close to Viridian hulls that their shields almost touched. The enemy ships could not fire without risking hitting their own vessels. The concentrated assault fell apart as Viridian commanders held their fire, afraid of destroying their allies. The maneuver bought Casey the seconds she needed. The Cascade drive recharged enough to restore full phasing capability, and the Defiant emerged from the enemy formation behind their lines. Greg launched a spread of 6 torpedoes, each one finding a different target. 6 more Viridian ships went dark, their weapons systems destroyed and engines disabled. The remaining vessels finally began to break, their formation collapsing as individual captains decided survival was more important than victory. Jack saw the fleet starting to scatter and knew this was the critical moment. If he let them run, they would regroup and potentially return with even more ships. He needed to end this decisively. He ordered Linda to position the Defiant at the main jump point, the only viable escape route that would not take weeks to traverse. The ship moved into position, blocking the exit like a lone guardian at a gate. Jack opened another wideband transmission, his voice carrying authority and finality. He told the Viridian fleet that they had 2 choices: surrender immediately and receive medical assistance for their wounded, or continue fighting and be destroyed. He promised that any ship that powered down its weapons would not be fired upon. He gave them 5 minutes to decide. The Viridian commanders argued among themselves on open channels that Kevin monitored. Some wanted to fight, believing that 300 ships could still defeat one, regardless of technology. Others pointed out that they had lost their war commander and nearly 100 vessels without inflicting a single casualty on the enemy. A few pragmatic voices suggested that surrender was the only logical choice, that returning home alive to report on this new threat was more valuable than dying for pride. The 5 minutes passed slowly. Jack watched the tactical display, ready to resume combat if necessary. But one by one, Viridian ships began powering down their weapons. It started with the smaller vessels, then spread to the cruisers and battleships. Within 10 minutes, the entire fleet had surrendered. 200 ships floated in space, their crews alive but defeated, trying to comprehend how they had lost a battle they should have won easily. On the Kelthara Council Station, Marek stared at the sensor displays in shock. The battle was over. The Viridian fleet had surrendered to a single human ship. He looked at his aides and saw the same disbelief reflected in their faces. One of them suggested that perhaps the sensors were malfunctioning, that this could not be real. But the data was clear and verified. Captain Jack Morrison and the Defiant had accomplished the impossible. Jack sat back in his command chair and allowed himself a moment of relief before issuing new orders. He told Helen to prepare to receive wounded from the disabled Viridian ships. He instructed Kevin to send a message to the Kelthara Council, assuring them that the threat had been neutralized. He ordered Greg to maintain weapons lock on any ship that showed signs of powering up, and he asked Casey how long the Cascade drive needed before it could jump them home. Her answer was 6 hours minimum, which meant they would be vulnerable if any Viridian reinforcements arrived. But no reinforcements came. The battle was over, and the galaxy had witnessed something unprecedented. A single ship from a species most civilizations barely knew had defeated an armada from an empire that had seemed unstoppable. The transmission feeds that Kevin had established meant that billions of beings across dozens of worlds had watched the entire engagement. By the time the Defiant began rescue operations, Jack Morrison's name was already becoming legend. The debris field stretched across thousands of kilometers, a graveyard of broken warships and shattered metal. Disabled Viridian vessels drifted among the wreckage, their emergency lights blinking distress signals into the void. Inside those ships, thousands of alien warriors, who had expected an easy victory, now faced the humiliation of defeat and the uncertainty of what would happen next. They had heard stories of what happened to defeated enemies in their own empire. Surrender meant slavery at best, execution at worst. They had no reason to believe humanity would treat them differently. Jack stood on the Defiance Bridge reviewing casualty reports from the Viridian fleet. 87 ships had been destroyed outright when their reactors exploded or their life support failed. Another 113 were disabled but intact, their crews trapped inside damaged vessels. The remaining ships were functional but had surrendered, their commanders waiting to learn their fate. Jack felt the weight of those numbers. Each destroyed ship represented hundreds of lives ended. Families that would never see their loved ones again, even if those loved ones had been serving an empire built on conquest. He gave Helen the authorization to begin emergency rescue operations. The medical officer had already assembled her team and prepared the medical bay to handle alien physiology. She had downloaded Viridian biological data from the ship's computers, studying their anatomy during the battle. Now, she stood ready to save lives, regardless of what uniform those lives wore. She activated the Defiance transporter systems, designed to beam matter directly from one location to another, and began pulling wounded Viridians directly into the medical bay. The first group materialized on the transport pads, their scaled bodies burned and broken. Some were unconscious from blood loss or shock. Others stared at Helen and her team with eyes full of fear and confusion. They expected torture or interrogation, but instead, they received medical care. Helen worked quickly, her hands steady as she applied treatments adapted for Viridian biology. Her assistants moved between patients, administering painkillers and stabilizing critical injuries. Within minutes, the first group was stable, and Helen was beaming in the next batch. Greg remained at his weapons station, sensors locked on every Viridian ship. His orders were clear. Any vessel that powered up its weapons would be destroyed instantly. He watched the displays with unwavering focus, looking for any sign of treachery. Some part of him wanted an excuse to resume fire, to punish an enemy that had come here to enslave innocent people. But the professional part of him, the part that made him an excellent officer, kept his emotions in check. His finger hovered near the firing control, ready, but not eager. Casey worked to stabilize the Cascade drive after the intense battle. The system had performed beyond specifications, but that came with a cost. Several components were showing stress fractures, and the exotic matter containment needed recalibration. She ran diagnostics while simultaneously routing power to the medical bay for Helen's operations. The chief engineer had gone 72 hours without sleep, sustained by stimulants and determination. Her hands moved across control panels with practiced efficiency, even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Kevin compiled battle footage and sensor data into comprehensive reports. His recordings showed the entire engagement from multiple angles, documenting every shot fired and every evasive maneuver. He knew this data would be analyzed by military strategists across the galaxy for years to come. But more than that, he knew the images of the Defiant facing down 300 Viridian warships would become iconic. He had witnessed history, and he had ensured that history would be preserved. Linda used the lull in combat to run full diagnostics on the navigation systems. The stress of combat maneuvering had pushed the engines to their limits. She found minor damage in 3 thruster assemblies and a concerning fluctuation in the faster-than-light drive. She flagged the issues for Casey's attention and began plotting contingency routes in case they needed to leave the system quickly. A good navigator always had an escape plan. The Kelthara Council sent a shuttle to the Defiant carrying their most senior members. Marek led the delegation, his 4 arms holding gifts of crystal sculptures and precious metals. When they arrived in the Defiant's hangar bay, they were greeted by Jack himself, who had changed from his combat uniform into formal diplomatic attire. The Kelthara visitors bowed low, a gesture of deep respect in their culture, but Jack asked them to stand as equals. Marek struggled to find words adequate to express his gratitude. His people had been certain they would die or become slaves, and now they were safe because of 5 humans in 1 ship. He tried to present the gifts, but Jack politely declined, explaining that Earth did not require payment for doing what was right. The statement confused Marek. In his experience, no one helped without expecting something in return. Power demanded tribute. Protection required payment. That was how the galaxy worked. Jack invited the Kelthara delegation to the observation lounge, where they could talk privately. He explained that humanity had a different philosophy. Earth had grown up fighting itself. Nation against nation. Ideology against ideology. And those conflicts had nearly destroyed their world. Humanity had learned the hard way that true strength came from cooperation, not domination. When Earth finally reached the stars, they carried that lesson with them. They did not want to build an empire. They wanted to be part of a galactic community where civilizations helped each other survive. Marek listened carefully, trying to understand this strange species that fought like warriors, but spoke like philosophers. He asked the question that troubled him most. Why had Earth sent only 1 ship? Jack's answer was simple but profound. Sending a fleet would have made the battle about numbers, about who had more ships and bigger weapons. Sending 1 ship made the battle about something else entirely. It demonstrated that humanity did not need overwhelming force to stand against tyranny. It proved that ingenuity and courage could triumph over brute strength. The Kelthara leader asked about the Defiant's technology, wanting to know if such power could be shared. Jack explained that the cascade drive and adaptive weapons were experimental and dangerous. In the wrong hands, they could cause more harm than good. But Earth was willing to share defensive technologies with peaceful civilizations. Shields, sensors, and point defense systems that could help protect against aggressive empires like the Viridians. The goal was not to create military might, but to create security. While Jack met with the Kelthara delegation, Casey received reports from the medical bay. Helen had stabilized over 300 wounded Viridians, with more being transported every hour. The chief engineer had to constantly adjust power distribution to handle the increased load. She found herself admiring the efficiency of human compassion. They had just fought a brutal battle against these aliens, and now they were saving their lives. It seemed contradictory, but it was somehow very human. Kevin's compiled footage began spreading across the galactic communications network. The battle had been broadcast live, but now cleaned and edited versions with commentary were reaching every corner of known space. News organizations on hundreds of worlds led with the story. A single human ship defeating a Viridian armada. The images were undeniable. The tactical data was verified by multiple independent sources. The galaxy could not look away. The Viridian Empire's capital world received the news in stunned silence. The High Council gathered in emergency session, trying to comprehend how their most powerful fleet had been defeated. Some called it impossible, claiming the footage must be fabricated. Others demanded immediate retaliation, calling for every available ship to be sent to destroy Earth. But the pragmatic voices pointed out the obvious. If one human ship could do this, what could a fleet of human ships accomplish? Attacking Earth might result in the Empire's total destruction. 3 factions emerged within the Viridian government. The Hawks wanted war, believing that honor demanded vengeance, regardless of cost. The Doves wanted peace, arguing that humanity had shown mercy by accepting surrender and treating wounded. The Reformers saw opportunity, believing that Threknal's aggressive expansion had been a mistake and that the Empire needed to change course. Within days, these factions would begin struggling for control, and the once unified Empire would start to fracture. Jack received a secure transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Gomez appeared on the screen, her expression mixing pride and concern. She congratulated him on his victory but warned that his success had changed everything. Every major civilization in the galaxy was now reassessing their relationship with humanity. Some saw Earth as a potential ally. Others saw them as a threat that needed to be eliminated before they grew stronger. The comfortable anonymity humanity had enjoyed was gone forever. The Admiral informed Jack that diplomatic requests were flooding Earth's communication systems. Dozens of civilizations wanted treaties, technology exchanges, or military alliances. Some were genuine, others were clearly attempts at espionage. Earth's government was overwhelmed trying to sort legitimate offers from traps. She ordered Jack to remain in Kelthara space until a diplomatic team arrived to handle negotiations. His presence would reassure the Kelthara people and serve as a deterrent against any Viridian retaliation. Jack accepted the orders but privately worried about the long-term implications. The Defiant's victory had been possible because the Viridians did not know what they were facing. Surprise and superior technology had won the day. But enemies would study this battle, analyze Earth's tactics, and develop countermeasures. The Cascade Drive was powerful, but not invincible. The adaptive torpedoes were effective, but could be defended against with proper shielding modifications. Humanity's advantage was temporary, measured in months or years at most. He called his senior crew to the observation lounge after the Kelthara delegation departed. They gathered around the table, exhausted but alert. Jack laid out his concerns, frankly. They had won this battle, but the war for humanity's survival in a hostile galaxy had just begun. Earth needed time to develop allies, establish diplomatic relationships, and build defenses. The Defiant's mission was not over. If anything, it had just started. Helen spoke first, pointing out that they had proven something important today. Humanity could be both strong and merciful. They had defeated the Viridians decisively, but had also saved hundreds of enemy lives. That sent a message just as powerful as the military victory. It told the galaxy that humans were not conquerors seeking empire. They were defenders, standing against tyranny. Greg disagreed partially. He argued that mercy meant nothing if they could not back it up with strength. The Viridians had surrendered because they had no choice, not because they were moved by human compassion. If Earth wanted to protect peaceful civilizations, they needed more ships, like the Defiant. They needed to build a fleet that could respond to threats across the galaxy simultaneously. Casey added that technology alone would not be enough. Earth needed allies who could provide resources, intelligence, and strategic depth. The Cascade Drive required rare materials that were expensive and difficult to obtain. Building a fleet would strain Earth's economy, unless they established trade relationships with other civilizations. The battle had opened doors, and now humanity needed to walk through them wisely. Linda suggested that they focus on what they did best: being unpredictable. The Viridians had lost because they could not imagine a ship like the Defiant. Earth should continue developing unexpected technologies and unconventional tactics. Let other species build bigger fleets. Humans would build smarter ships. Kevin reminded them that perception mattered as much as reality. The galaxy now saw humanity as a power that could stand against the Viridians. Earth needed to maintain that image while working behind the scenes to strengthen their actual capabilities. Propaganda was a weapon just as valuable as torpedoes. And the footage of this battle was the best propaganda humanity could ask for. Jack listened to his crew's insights and felt grateful for their perspectives. They were right on all counts. Military strength, diplomatic relationships, technological innovation, and strategic communication all mattered. Earth needed to pursue every advantage simultaneously. And the Defiant needed to continue being the tip of the spear, the visible symbol of human resolve that the galaxy could see and understand. He stood and looked out the viewport at the field of disabled Viridian ships. Somewhere in those vessels were warriors who had come here to enslave innocent people. Now they were receiving medical care from the very humans they had intended to defeat. It was a strange kind of victory. One that raised as many questions as it answered. But it was the kind of victory that Jack believed in. One that proved strength did not have to mean cruelty. The Defiant remained in Kelthara space for 3 weeks, while Earth's diplomatic teams arrived and began negotiations. During that time, Jack and his crew witnessed the ripples of their victory spreading across the galaxy. Every day brought new developments, new responses to what had happened. The battle that had lasted only 40 minutes continued to echo through civilizations light years away. The Viridian Empire fractured faster than anyone expected. The 3 factions that had emerged after Threknal's death could not find common ground. The Hawks attempted a military coup, trying to seize control of the government and declare war on humanity. The Doves exposed the plot, and civil conflict erupted on the Viridian homeworld. The Reformers used the chaos to implement emergency measures, effectively creating a separate government in the Empire's outer colonies. Within 2 weeks, what had been a unified threat became 3 separate entities, each claiming to be the legitimate Viridian authority. 2 of those factions reached out to Earth independently. The Doves sent an official apology for the attempted conquest of Kelthara and requested peace negotiations. They offered to withdraw from all occupied systems and pay reparations to civilizations they had wronged. The Reformers took a different approach, proposing a mutual defense treaty and offering access to Viridian territory for Earth's ships. Both factions wanted to align with humanity before their rivals did, calculating that Earth's protection would legitimize their claims to power. Admiral Gomez forwarded these proposals to Jack with instructions to provide input from a tactical perspective. He spent hours reviewing the offers with his crew, trying to identify potential traps or hidden agendas. Linda analyzed territorial maps, looking for strategic advantages. Greg assessed military capabilities, determining which faction could actually deliver on their promises. Casey evaluated technological exchanges being offered, identifying what was genuine innovation versus outdated equipment. Helen considered humanitarian aspects, asking which faction was most likely to honor peace agreements. Kevin researched the individuals making the offers, building profiles of Viridian leaders and their motivations. Their recommendation was cautious engagement with both factions. Earth should accept the Dove's apology and begin peace talks. But slowly. Quick agreements would seem desperate and might encourage other species to offer insincere treaties, hoping for similar terms. The Reformers' military alliance was more complicated. Earth did not want to become involved in Viridian internal politics, but having allies in the former Empire's territory would provide strategic depth. The key was to structure any agreement so that Earth was not obligated to support one faction against another. While diplomatic maneuvering continued, the Kelthara people celebrated their liberation. Marek declared a planetary holiday and invited Jack to attend ceremonies on the largest colony. Thousands of Kelthara gathered in the capital plaza, waving banners displaying Earth's flag alongside their own. Children held signs thanking the humans, and artists had created statues depicting the Defiant standing against the Viridian fleet. Jack attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with the hero worship, but he understood the political necessity of showing unity. During the ceremony, a young Kelthara approached Jack with a question that had been bothering her. She asked why humanity had helped them when Earth had nothing to gain. Her people were miners and traders, not warriors or scientists. They had no advanced technology to offer, no strategic resources that Earth could not obtain elsewhere. Why had humans risked their lives for strangers who could offer nothing in return? Jack's answer was simple but profound. He told her that humanity had learned a painful lesson in their history. When good people did nothing in the face of evil, evil won. Earth had almost destroyed itself because too many people looked away from injustice, telling themselves it was not their problem. Humanity reached the stars determined never to make that mistake again. They helped the Kelthara because it was right, not because it was profitable. He told her that if she really wanted to repay Earth, she should remember this moment and promise to help others when they needed it, to pass forward the kindness that had been shown to her people. The girl listened with wide eyes and promised solemnly. The exchange was captured by Kevin's ever-present recording equipment, and the footage spread across the galactic network. The image of a hardened military captain kneeling to speak gently with an alien child became another symbol of humanity's approach. Other species watched and wondered if Earth was genuinely different or if this was simply sophisticated propaganda. Time would tell which interpretation was correct. Earth's government moved quickly to capitalize on the situation. The diplomatic corps began formal negotiations with 17 different civilizations that had expressed interest in treaties. Trade agreements were proposed, establishing Earth as a hub for commerce between species that had previously dealt through intermediaries. Cultural exchange programs launched, bringing alien scholars to Earth universities and sending human researchers to study on distant worlds. Military cooperation agreements were drafted carefully, offering Earth's assistance to peaceful civilizations under threat, but avoiding commitments that would drag humanity into existing conflicts. Not everyone welcomed Earth's emergence as a galactic power. The Krellian Consortium, a federation of merchant species that had dominated interstellar trade for centuries, saw humanity as a threat to their economic monopoly. They began a quiet campaign to undermine Earth's reputation, spreading rumors that the Defiant's victory had been exaggerated or that humanity possessed weapons too dangerous to be trusted. They pressured their client states to reject Earth's trade proposals and funded propaganda suggesting that humans were secretly planning conquest. The Zithrak sovereignty, a militaristic empire that rivaled the Viridians in power, watched humanity with deep suspicion. Their strategic analysts concluded that if one Earth ship could defeat 300 Viridian vessels, then Earth represented an existential threat. The sovereignty began mobilizing their fleet and accelerating weapons development programs. They did not immediately declare hostility, but their preparations were obvious to anyone monitoring their territory. A Cold War was developing, one that could turn hot if either side miscalculated. Jack received intelligence briefings about these developments with growing concern. He had hoped the Defiant's victory would buy Earth time to establish itself peacefully. Instead, it seemed to have accelerated everyone's timelines. Potential enemies were preparing for conflict, while potential allies were rushing to secure agreements. The galaxy was being forced to choose sides, and the sides were forming around Earth, whether humanity wanted that or not. The crew of the Defiant began to feel the strain of extended deployment. They had been away from Earth for 2 months, most of that time spent at high alert. Casey's exhaustion was affecting her judgment, causing minor errors in maintenance schedules. Linda was having trouble sleeping, her mind constantly running scenarios and escape routes. Greg's temper shortened, snapping at crew members over small mistakes. Helen treated increasing numbers of stress-related ailments among personnel. Kevin noticed his own deteriorating mood, but felt powerless to improve it. Jack recognized the signs of burnout and requested permission to return to Earth for rest and refit. Admiral Gomez denied the request. She needed the Defiant visible and active, a reminder to the galaxy that humanity could project power when necessary. She ordered Jack to conduct goodwill tours of 3 nearby systems that had expressed interest in Earth alliances. The missions would be diplomatic rather than military, but the Defiant's presence would reinforce the message that Earth defended its friends. The crew accepted the orders with weary resignation. They understood the strategic necessity, even as they longed for home. The first goodwill visit was to the Thalaron system, inhabited by a species of aquatic beings who lived in vast underwater cities. The Therlons had been victims of Viridian raids for decades, losing territory and population to slave-taking expeditions. They viewed Earth as potential saviors and welcomed the defiant with elaborate ceremonies conducted in flooded chambers that required the human crew to wear breathing apparatus. The second visit was to Corallus Prime, home to a civilization of insectoid beings whose society was organized like a hive but with individual consciousness. The Corallians were natural engineers who had achieved impressive technological advancement despite never leaving their home system. They wanted to trade their engineering expertise for Earth's military protection and access to faster-than-light travel technology. Negotiations were complex because Corallian decision-making involved consensus among thousands of individuals. But eventually, a framework agreement was reached. The third visit was to Haven Station, a neutral trading post operated by multiple species as a meeting ground for commerce and diplomacy. Haven's administrators wanted Earth to participate in their Security Council, helping to maintain order in a facility where dozens of potentially hostile civilizations interacted daily. Jack agreed to assign a small Earth contingent to Haven's security force, establishing humanity's first permanent presence outside their home system. Throughout these visits, Jack gave countless interviews to galactic news organizations. He explained Earth's philosophy repeatedly, emphasizing cooperation over domination. He downplayed the Defiant's capabilities while making clear that humanity would defend itself and its allies vigorously. He presented Earth as a stabilizing force, offering an alternative to the traditional power dynamics of conquest and submission. Some reporters were convinced, others remained skeptical. But all of them amplified humanity's message across the galaxy. During the Goodwill Tour, Casey finally got approval to perform major maintenance on the Cascade Drive. The Therlons provided engineering support, their aquatic environment offering unique advantages for certain types of repairs. Working together, human and alien engineers replaced damaged components and upgraded systems that had revealed weaknesses during combat. Casey was impressed by Thalaron technical knowledge and established an ongoing consultation relationship. She shared some basic principles of Earth engineering while learning Thalaron approaches to energy management. Both species benefited from the exchange. Linda used the downtime to complete her navigation certification for 3 new star systems. She studied local hazards, mapped gravity wells, and calculated jump coordinates that would allow the Defiant to operate effectively in this region of space. She also began training 2 Thalaron navigators in human techniques, establishing Earth's first cross-species educational program. The students struggled with some concepts, their aquatic psychology leading to different spatial reasoning. But they were eager learners who adapted quickly. Greg conducted joint training exercises with security forces from all 3 systems they visited. He was impressed by the variety of tactical approaches different species employed. The Therlons favored fluid, adaptive strategies that matched their environment. The Corallians used swarm tactics with hundreds of small units, overwhelming larger forces. Haven's security forces employed defensive techniques designed to minimize casualties among civilians. Greg incorporated elements of all these approaches into his own thinking, recognizing that human tactics could be improved by learning from alien perspectives. Helen established medical exchange programs at each location. She taught alien doctors about human physiology and emergency medicine. While learning about their healing techniques, some species used biological methods that seemed like magic to human science, growing replacement organs or manipulating cellular structure directly. Others employed technology that Helen barely understood, machines that could diagnose and treat at the molecular level. She recorded everything, knowing that these exchanges would revolutionize medicine on Earth and potentially save millions of lives. Kevin compiled footage from the Goodwill Tour into a documentary that became one of the most watched programs in galactic history. His editing presented humanity as explorers and diplomats, rather than warriors. He showed human crew members laughing with alien friends, working together to solve technical problems, and sharing meals despite vastly different biology. The documentary humanized Earth in a way that military demonstrations never could. It showed that humans were not just dangerous but also kind, not just intelligent, but also curious, not just strong but also humble. By the time the Defiant finally received permission to return to Earth, 3 months had passed since the Battle of Kelthara. The crew was exhausted, but proud of what they had accomplished. They had not just won a battle, but had begun building the foundation for Earth's place in the galactic community. As Linda plotted the jump coordinates for home, Jack reflected on how much had changed. When they left Earth, humanity had been a minor species barely noticed by the great powers. Now they were players in galactic politics, with alliances forming and enemies emerging. The jump home took 3 days, during which the crew finally got real rest. Casey slept for 16 hours straight. Greg spent time in the gym, working out tension that had built up over months. Linda watched movies from Earth, reconnecting with her culture after months of alien surroundings. Helen caught up on medical journals, reading about developments she had missed. Kevin organized his massive archive of footage, creating backups and cataloging thousands of hours of recordings. Jack spent the journey writing his report for Earth Command. He documented every conversation, every observation, every lesson learned. He included his crew's recommendations about future diplomatic strategy and military preparedness. He was bluntly honest about both Earth's strengths and vulnerabilities. The Defiant had proven that human technology could compete with or surpass any known species. But one ship, or even 10 ships, could not protect an entire civilization. Earth needed to build carefully, expanding capabilities, while maintaining the moral high ground that made allies willing to support them. Earth appeared on the viewport as a blue and green jewel hanging in the darkness of space. And Jack felt emotions swell in his chest that he had not expected. He had been gone only 3 months, but it felt like years. So much had changed, both within himself and across the galaxy. The Defiant descended through layers of orbital traffic that had tripled since their departure. New stations were under construction, and defensive satellites ringed the planet in numbers that would have seemed paranoid before Kelthara. Earth was preparing for a future where isolation was no longer possible. The ship docked at Geneva Orbital Station, and the crew was met with a hero's welcome that made them uncomfortable. Thousands of people lined the observation galleries, cheering and waving flags. News crews from every major network jostled for position, shouting questions that were lost in the noise. Military bands played triumphant music, while politicians waited to shake hands and claim association with Earth's champions. Jack endured the circus with patience, knowing it was necessary, but he longed for quiet and privacy. Admiral Gomez rescued him from the crowds after an hour, pulling him into a secure conference room where they could talk privately. She looked older than Jack remembered. The stress of managing Earth's sudden emergence as a galactic power showing in new lines around her eyes. She told him that the past 3 months had been the most intense period in human history. Earth's government had been forced to create entirely new departments to handle diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and military coordination. The Admiralty had been restructured 3 times as they tried to adapt to a strategic situation that evolved daily. She shared intelligence reports that painted a complex picture. Earth now had formal alliances with 7 civilizations, trade agreements with 23 others, and productive dialogues with dozens more. The economic impact was already visible, with alien technology and resources flowing into Earth markets, while human goods found eager buyers across the galaxy. Cultural exchanges were booming, with human art and music becoming fashionable on alien worlds, while Earth audiences consumed alien entertainment with fascination. But the news was not all positive. The Zithrak sovereignty had mobilized a battle fleet of 500 warships positioned near Earth's most distant colony. They had not attacked, but their intentions were clear. The Krellian consortium continued their economic warfare, bribing officials and spreading propaganda designed to isolate humanity. Pirate groups that had previously avoided human targets now saw Earth ships as valuable prizes, leading to attacks on cargo vessels in remote systems. And within the fractured Viridian Empire, the Hawks were gaining power, calling for renewed aggression against all their enemies. especially humanity. Admiral Gomez explained that Earth needed to expand its military capabilities rapidly without appearing aggressive. The solution was the Guardian program, a plan to build a fleet of advanced warships that would protect peaceful civilizations from threats like the Viridians. The program would be presented as a humanitarian initiative, offering security to species that could not defend themselves. But the real purpose was to establish Earth's military presence across multiple sectors, creating strategic depth and intelligence networks that would detect threats before they reached human space. Jack was offered overall command of the Guardian program. His rank would be promoted to Commodore, and he would have authority over the construction, training, and deployment of humanity's new fleet. The offer came with a caveat. He would spend most of his time at headquarters rather than commanding from a ship's bridge. Admiral Gomez needed his tactical expertise and diplomatic experience in strategic planning, not just tactical operations. Jack asked for time to consider, and the Admiral gave him 72 hours. He used that time to reconnect with his crew and learn their plans. Linda had been promoted to captain and given command of the second Defiant-class vessel, currently under construction at Mars orbit. She was excited and terrified in equal measure, honored by the responsibility but aware of the enormous expectations. Her ship would be named Guardian, the first of the new program's vessels, and she would be expected to match Jack's success. Greg was offered a position as chief weapons instructor at the new tactical academy being built on Luna. His role would be training the next generation of officers in combat systems and strategy. He accepted immediately, recognizing that his experience at Kelthara made him uniquely qualified to teach. He told Jack that every officer who graduated from his program would be ready to face impossible odds, just as the Defiance crew had. Casey was recruited to head the Research and Development Division, leading teams that would push human technology even further beyond current capabilities. She had dozens of projects already in mind, improvements to the Cascade drive that would make it more efficient and less dangerous. She was also working on counter-technologies, anticipating that enemies would eventually develop weapons capable of affecting phased ships. Staying ahead of the technological curve would be Casey's responsibility, and she embraced the challenge. Helen was offered the position of Chief Medical Officer for the Guardian program, responsible for healthcare across the entire fleet. She would also lead the Xenobiology Research Program, studying alien physiology to improve medical treatment for the diverse species that Earth would encounter. Her work during the Goodwill Tour had proven that cross-species medical exchange benefited everyone, and she intended to expand those programs systematically. Kevin was approached by multiple civilian organizations wanting to hire him as a journalist and documentary filmmaker. The galactic media had recognized his talent, and several major networks offered him positions that would make him wealthy and famous. But Kevin surprised everyone by choosing to remain in Earth's military as Chief of Information Operations. He believed that controlling humanity's narrative was crucial to long-term success, and he wanted to be the one shaping that narrative, rather than just recording it. Jack met with his crew one final time in the observation lounge of Geneva Station. They shared a meal together. Human food that tasted better than anything they had eaten during deployment. They reminisced about the battle, about the fear and exhilaration of facing 300 enemy warships. They talked about the aliens they had met, the friendships formed across species barriers. They acknowledged that their lives had changed forever, that they would never be anonymous again. Linda raised a glass and proposed a toast to the captain who had led them through the impossible. Greg added that they had proven something important at Kelthara, that humans belonged among the stars, that Earth had a role to play in galactic affairs. Casey said that their victory had been just the beginning, that humanity's real journey was starting now. Helen reminded them that their success had not been about weapons or tactics alone, but about maintaining their humanity even in combat. Kevin promised to make sure the galaxy never forgot what they had accomplished together. Jack accepted their tributes with humility, then redirected their focus. He told them that everything they had achieved at Kelthara would be meaningless if humanity failed to build on that foundation. The Guardian program was Earth's chance to become a stabilizing force in the galaxy, to prove that power could be used for protection rather than conquest. Each of them had a role to play in that vision, and he expected them to succeed just as decisively in their new positions as they had aboard the Defiant. After the dinner, Jack returned to his quarters and spent the night reviewing his options. He could accept command of the Guardian program and help shape Earth's military strategy from behind a desk, or he could decline and request to remain aboard the Defiant, continuing to lead from the front. Both choices had merit. Both would serve humanity's interests, but only one felt right. He contacted Admiral Gomez the next morning and accepted the position with conditions. He would command the Guardian program, but he would do so from the Defiant. His flagship would not be confined to Earth orbit but would deploy wherever the situation demanded. He would lead both strategically and tactically, providing guidance to the fleet while remaining visible to allies and enemies alike. The galaxy needed to see that Earth's champion was still active, still ready to stand against threats, Admiral Gomez argued initially, pointing out the risks of having overall command stationed on a ship that might see combat. Jack countered that hiding in safety would send the wrong message. Earth's leaders needed to be willing to face the same dangers they asked others to endure. The debate lasted 2 hours before the Admiral finally agreed, with strict conditions about when Jack was required to return to Earth for consultations and strategic planning sessions. The Guardian program was announced to the galactic community 6 weeks later, during a major diplomatic conference held on Haven Station. Jack represented Earth, standing before ambassadors from 87 civilizations. He explained that humanity recognized the galaxy, faced threats that peaceful species could not counter alone. Earth was committing resources to build a fleet dedicated to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The Guardian program would respond to threats against any civilization that requested assistance, regardless of whether they had treaties with Earth. The speech was met with mixed reactions. Some ambassadors applauded, seeing Earth's offer as genuine altruism. Others were suspicious, viewing the program as cover for military expansion. A few were openly hostile, particularly representatives from the Krellian Consortium and Zithrak sovereignty, who saw Earth's growing influence as a direct threat to their interests. But the response that mattered most came from the smaller, vulnerable civilizations who had lived in fear of empires like the Viridians. They expressed overwhelming support and gratitude. 3 months after the conference, the first Guardian-class vessels completed construction. Linda's ship was commissioned alongside 2 others, the Sentinel, commanded by Captain Ryan Foster, and the Vigilant, commanded by Captain Nicole Park. Each ship incorporated lessons learned from the Defiant's combat performance, with improved cascade drives, enhanced weapon systems, and better crew accommodations for extended deployments. The Guardian fleet conducted its first operation 4 months after commissioning. A distress call came from the Andara sector, where a species called the Myrian were under attack by raiders. The raiders were using abandoned Viridian warships, acquired during the Empire's collapse, to terrorize civilian populations. Linda's Guardian responded first, arriving in the system within hours. She followed the tactical doctrine that Jack had developed, offering the raiders one chance to surrender before engaging. The raiders refused, confident that their 15 captured warships could defeat one Earth vessel. They learned the same lesson the Viridians had learned at Kelthara. The Guardian disabled 11 ships in the first 20 minutes of combat, and the remaining 4 surrendered. Linda implemented the same policies Jack had used, providing medical care to wounded enemies and ensuring prisoners were treated humanely. The Myrian people were saved, and Earth gained another grateful ally. Similar operations followed across multiple sectors. The Sentinel stopped an invasion of the Kelros system by an opportunistic warlord. The Vigilant rescued colonists trapped on a mining station attacked by automated defense systems gone rogue. The Defiant, with Jack in command, intervened in a territorial dispute between 2 civilizations that was escalating toward war, helping negotiate a peaceful settlement that satisfied both parties. With each success, Earth's reputation grew, and the Guardian program proved its value. Not every operation succeeded perfectly. The Vigilant took heavy damage during a rescue mission when an enemy used weapons specifically designed to counter the Cascade drive. Captain Park survived, but 8 crew members died, a reminder that human technology was not invincible. Casey immediately began developing countermeasures, but the incident reinforced that enemies were adapting. The technological advantage Earth enjoyed was temporary, and they needed to maintain innovation to stay ahead. The Zithrak sovereignty watched Earth's expanding influence with growing alarm. Their strategic analysts concluded that within 5 years, Earth's network of alliances would surround Zithrak territory, limiting their ability to expand. The sovereignty's leadership debated their options in secret sessions. Some argued for immediate war, striking before Earth grew stronger. Others counseled patience, suggesting they infiltrate Earth's systems and sabotage the Guardian program from within. The debate remained unresolved, but Zithrak military buildup continued. Jack received intelligence about Zithrak deliberations with concern but not fear. War with a major power was inevitable. Eventually, the mathematics of galactic politics made that clear. Earth needed to be ready, but they also needed to avoid appearing aggressive or giving enemies justification for preemptive strikes. The balance was delicate, requiring constant diplomatic effort alongside military preparation. The first anniversary of the Battle of Kelthara was commemorated with ceremonies across Earth and at multiple allied worlds. Jack attended the primary event at Kelthara itself, where a monument had been erected depicting the Defiant facing the Viridian fleet. Council leader Merrick gave a speech about how one ship had changed everything, about how humanity had proven that courage and justice could triumph over tyranny. The young Kelthara girl who had asked Jack why Earth helped them read a poem she had written, expressing her people's gratitude in beautiful, simple language. Jack gave his own speech. Briefer than Marek's, but carefully crafted. He acknowledged the victory at Kelthara, but emphasized that the real victory would be measured in decades, not days. Earth's goal was not just to win battles but to build a galaxy where battles became less necessary. The Guardian program was one step toward that vision, but it required participation from all civilizations who valued peace over conquest. He called on the assembled representatives to commit themselves to creating that better future. The speech was transmitted across the galaxy, and reactions varied predictably. Allies praised Jack's vision, while enemies mocked it as naive idealism. But among the smaller civilizations, the ones who had suffered under larger powers for centuries, the speech resonated deeply. Applications to join Earth's alliance network increased dramatically, and the Guardian program's waiting list for protection assignments grew longer. 6 months later, Jack stood once again on the bridge of the Defiant, preparing for another jump to another crisis. The ship had been refitted with the latest upgrades, incorporating technologies developed by Casey's research teams. The crew had rotated partially, with some original members moving to other positions while new officers joined. Linda commanded her own vessel now. Greg trained hundreds of students. Casey pushed the boundaries of science. Helen healed both humans and aliens. And Kevin shaped humanity's story for galactic audiences. But Jack remained where he had always been, at the center of the action, ready to face whatever challenges emerged. The Defiant was jumping to the Deneb sector, where a rogue AI had seized control of an automated factory and was producing weapons for sale to anyone with currency. The situation was complex, involving multiple parties with competing interests. But that was the nature of galactic politics. Simple problems had simple solutions. Complex problems required the kind of thinking that humanity specialized in. As Linda's replacement navigator initialized the jump sequence, Jack reflected on how far Earth had come in just 1 year. They had been unknown, dismissed as minor players in a galaxy dominated by ancient empires. Now they were the Guardians, the ones that others called when hope seemed lost. It was a heavy responsibility, one that would demand sacrifice and cost lives. But it was a responsibility that Jack believed humanity had earned the right to bear. The jump alarm sounded, and the Defiant slipped into faster-than-light travel, leaving normal space behind. Jack watched the stars blur into streams of light, thinking about the young Kelthara girl's poem, and Merrick's speech, and Admiral Gomez's warnings, and his crew's dedication. He thought about the enemy ships they had destroyed, and the lives they had saved, and the allies they had made. He thought about the future, uncertain and dangerous, but full of possibility. The galaxy would never again underestimate a human ship. That lesson had been taught at Kelthara and reinforced in dozens of operations since. But more importantly, the galaxy was learning that humanity offered something beyond military power. They offered hope, the belief that things could be better, that justice was worth fighting for, that one ship, with the right crew and the right cause, could change everything. The Defiant emerged from jump space into the Deneb sector, sensors immediately scanning for the rogue AI's facility. Jack issued orders calmly, his crew responding with practiced efficiency. Another crisis. Another chance to prove that Earth belonged among the stars. Another opportunity to show the galaxy what humanity stood for. The work was never finished. The threats never stopped coming. But that was acceptable. As long as there were people who needed help, the Defiant would be there. As long as there were threats to the innocent, the Guardian program would respond. As long as there was a galaxy worth protecting, humanity would stand guard. The ship moved forward into the unknown, alone but unafraid, carrying the torch of human determination into the darkness of space. Behind them, Earth continued building, preparing, growing into its role as a galactic power. Ahead of them, countless worlds waited, some in need of rescue, some offering friendship, some plotting humanity's downfall. The future was uncertain. But Jack had learned at Kelthara that uncertainty was where humans thrived. Give humanity an impossible challenge, and they would find a way. Give them overwhelming odds, and they would even them. Give them a reason to fight, and they would never surrender. The Defiant disappeared into the dark between stars, one ship among billions, yet somehow still the most important ship in the galaxy, because it represented something that had been missing from galactic politics for too long. The idea that power should serve justice rather than the other way around. That idea, more than any weapon or technology, was humanity's greatest contribution to the stars. And as long as ships like the Defiant continued flying, as long as crews like Jack's continued serving, that idea would never die.